Welcome everybody to the PLP Pathways Webinar number 2 for the 2017-2018 school year. Today we're going to be talking about goals. We'll talk a little bit about reflection, and many of our teachers across the state are working on or preparing for student-led conferences, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And I first want to start out by thanking the Tarrant Institute and the Middle Grades Collaborative for their support of PLP Pathways. If you haven't done so already, you can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, or you can visit our website at PLP Pathways, where a lot of the resources that we'll be talking about this afternoon are located. And one of our primary goals is to share resources with teachers. And if you see a resource, feel free to use that. If you want to add resources, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So again, I'm Don Taylor. I'm broadcasting from Main Street Middle School here in Montpelier, and I'm going to let my co-hosts introduce themselves.
Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5'8" generalist at Wilson Central School.
I'm Allison Gothier. I teach at East Montpelier U32 Middle High School.
Okay, Kevin has fire drill testing going on, so we may periodically hear those sirens. So we're going to get right into the meat of the agenda today, which is about goal setting. And I'd like to hear how folks are dealing with goal setting, and then also after we talk about goal setting in your classroom, it'd be great to hear how goal setting is happening at the school level, and if there's any structures in place to facilitate that. So why don't we start with Allison and just let us know what you're doing in class, and maybe give us some timeline and some structures.
So again, I teach in the high school. It's a little bit different from the middle school model in that people are a bit more compartmentalized, but thankfully we have a 9th grade team. So the team has been working through the different areas of identity together. And actually during my weekly, or this past week, I met with my PLP consultant. I'm the person I'm consulting, and she actually had this identity tree, which I'd never seen before. You guys might be familiar with it, right? It just puts all the pieces of identity into a meaningful format so that students can really think about who they are and then what the leaves or goals would be. You guys are probably really familiar with it. But I'm definitely going to use that going forward once all the identity pieces are done to be helping students in 9th grade set goals for the year. And
okay.
The fact that we know them now.
Okay. Kevin, how about you? Okay. I can actually, I'll start. So one of the things, first of all, Allison, I have not heard of that identity tree, and that sounds like a great idea and a great graphic. And if that's something that we can PLP Pathways, I think that would be great. One of the things that we just finished here in my program, I think I mentioned this before, but Lori Lisai, who is at Lamoille South, had a great project. It was called the Geography of Self. And one of the things that I did in my identity unit was I tried to combine this idea of place and geography and community and how that impacts our identity. So at the same time I was covering some basics of geography, themes of geography, movement, etc. I was also going through the identity phase. We were learning about the kids. We were having them write their bios. We were also having them construct their PLPs on the new Google sites. And as you know, we consider the setting of goals to be the bridge from the identity phase into the growth and reflection phase. So after 5 or 6 weeks, when you get to know your students, you can have them set goals that are based not only on what you're observing in the classroom, but also the interests and the challenges and the strengths that they themselves have identified. So I think last week I spent a lot of language arts going through growth mindset, grit. We talked a lot about self-discipline, and we started out the whole process by actually defining what a goal is for the kids and what a goal, what it means and what are the important criteria. And then using that definition, we had kids set goals. And one of the ways I'm thinking about it now is how it's more of a process than it is, okay, you need to set goals, you need to have a sheet with your goals on it. Instead, it becomes more of a process about what is a goal, why do we set goals, what are the habits of learning that are going to help us achieve those goals. And then for the past, I guess this week, we've given the kids a template and we've asked them to set 4 goals, 2 academic, 1 transferable skill or learning expectation goal, and then a personal goal. And so right now, we're starting to see the results of that work come in. And I had mentioned that a lot of this is in light of the fact that we have our student-led conferences in 2 weeks, and we want to have those goals in place on the PLP. So that's the process we've been using. I do want to, I want to hear from Kevin, and then I also want to get back to this idea of the structures that are in place for teachers and professional development. And I don't know if Kevin, is the siren off there, Kevin?
It's going off a little bit. Is it really bad on your end?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So hopefully it'll go off in a second. So with us, we finished our goal setting earlier in the year. The way we do it is we send out in our summer mailing this before our Hopes and Dreams conferences where our 5th graders, we lay out the 5 different transferable skills, and we ask that each of our students has 1 goal per transferable skill area, and we really leave it open-ended. We have that conversation, that communication. You're looking at reading, speaking, listening, and writing, and problem solving. It's how do you tackle problems? How do you use a growth mindset? How do you persevere? And we really leave those open-ended, which is great because it allows them to come up with these bigger goals that are transferable. So they're able to pull evidence from, math class, from at home, from the soccer field, wherever they might be. So by the end of the trimester, they have evidence from all over the place supporting their growth in these goals. So we have our student-led conferences. They're able to advocate for themselves and say, yeah, I'm ready for a new goal. Here's all the evidence I have to show for it, and to move on that way. So on Swift House, that's how we handle it. We have the 5 goals. We set those up early in the school year. We have those ongoing conversations if they want to change them. But we really let those resonate at least through the trimester as they find evidences for them. School-wide, we started last year with just doing 1 academic, 1 personal goal. And they used a similar setup that we do on Swift House. And this year, we got some feedback from the other teachers just saying that some of the goals they were coming up with weren't like meaty. Like it was, I can learn to do a kickflip on my skateboard. It's a good personal goal, but there weren't many different pieces of opportunity to pull from different evidences. So we end up adding an executive functioning goal school-wide. So we created this executive functioning survey that we're giving out to all of our students that has 11 different areas as it relates to executive functioning, and have them assess themselves. And then we use those areas of concern to help guide a goal. And we've gotten awesome feedback for that because, again, that lends itself to goals being more transferable. On Swift, we gave that survey, but we didn't really make a separate executive functioning goal because that is already kind of embedded within the self-direction goal that we do. So we didn't want to add a 6th goal to it. So that's kind of where we are team-based and school-wide.
Okay. Allison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Tell us again, Kevin, when your student-led conferences are happening. It's in 2 weeks like Dawn? Or?
Yeah, so our student-led conferences, so we had all of our goal-setting conferences, and then we usually start them right toward the end of the first trimester. So, we'll start those up 2nd week of November or so. And on team, our conference day is actually tomorrow in the school, but on team, we do all of our conferences before and after school because our conferences take about 40 to 45 minutes. So we'll be meeting with students through November into December, starting up in a couple weeks.
Okay. And just real quick, I'd like to introduce our 2 other panelists. And the fire alarm is going off because they got onto the call. And if they could introduce themselves, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hallman. I'm a teacher at Essex Middle School.
Hi, I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South Supervisory Union.
All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate your coming on the call. And Kevin, we were just talking about goals. We got right into it. And Kevin mentioned a couple things that I think are worth emphasizing, and I'm not sure that we're emphasizing them enough. And one of those is this idea of parent involvement in the goals. And one of the things that I have done just yesterday was I put together a packet of information for the parents and families about signing up for the conferences and talking about the PLP. And there's a script for the student-led. And, you know, it just doesn't even dawn on me, or it hasn't dawned on me, how Kevin's idea of sending something out to the families and getting them to create goals with their kids, how important that could be. And I mean, right there is something that I could add to my practice this year that I think would be really interesting to see the results of. And then the second thing that he mentioned that I think is really, really, really important is this idea of getting feedback from the kids, not only about their goals, but about the goal setting process. And one of the things that I've been hearing is that goal setting is very difficult with kids, and that a lot of teachers might be dissatisfied with the results. And so I went back and I asked my kids, gave them a short Google survey. Do you understand the process that we went through to create goals? Do you understand how growth mindset and these different learning dispositions can help you achieve your goals? And they responded in a positive way, and that's sort of the first step, right? I then talked to James Nagel, who came in and he said about my survey, well, do they know what understand really means? Like, how do you dive deeper into that and get the kids to articulate what about the goal setting process that they do understand? And so it becomes this really interesting way of finding out what kids know and are able to do and what they want to know and be able to do. And so I think this idea of feedback and continuous reflection, not just about what they're doing, but about the goals that they have in the process, is really, really important. And I just want to emphasize this idea of engaging parents in the goal setting process. I am not doing that nearly enough or effectively enough. And Maura and Lindsay, maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you're doing that or addressing either of those issues, that'd be great.
I can go ahead. I'm actually, the reason I was delayed is because we are right now in the midst of our student-led conferences. And so we started yesterday and we'll be continuing into the evening today. But it's, it's just exactly what we're working on right now. What we do on our team is we have 70 seventh graders, which is new for me because I'm used to having a multi-age team. And so, it's really nice when you have a mix of age groups because half of them have done this before, but this is a whole new system for all of our kids. But we have them pretty much do what I call a flip conference. And they go home and they share, work that they are feeling good about, or areas that have been challenging for them. And they start to draft their goals with their family. And they bring those ideas, and just ideas really, draft to the conference. And we unfortunately only have 20 minutes per family, but it ends up being a half an hour or more because we just always go over. But we talk about, as a conversation, we talk about the goals together. And so we have them set, through this conversation, we develop an academic related, how do they want to grow as a learner? Personal, how do they want to grow as an individual? And then a career related goal, something that they want to dive deeper into, and this relates to their personal interest project that they'll be working on this year. So it's a conversation, and so far we're 3/4 of the way through our conferences, and they've been really amazing just to explore these goals as a whole homeschool partnership and really talk about them. And then we're jotting down notes, and they'll put them, once they're crafted, they'll put them on their PLP. But I think, especially with a new group of seventh graders that are all getting used to this new system and setting goals, it was important for us to do it this way, where they're coming up with some ideas and drafting ideas as a family unit, and then bringing them to the conference to have a discussion about them and conversation really about them. And through the conversation, not only are we learning so much more about them as individuals, but also developing those action steps so that they are specific and measurable, and that the goals are really solid. I think if you just ask kids to set goals, you're not going to find that. And I think most adults have a hard time setting, SMART goals. And so it takes time to really learn how to be a strong goal setter. So that's where we are right now. And we do give them a script to go home with as an outline. And then they also have an at conference kind of outline script. So they know they started by sharing their about me that they wrote. And that's a really nice way to start a conference and frame the conference in a real positive. Then we move into their goal drafting, and then we just work on talking about anything else that they would like to share or discuss.
Hey, Lindsay, just quick question, and I lost my connection there for a little bit, so you might have already stated this. Your script, is there a way that we could see what that script looks like? Because that would be awesome if we had a bank of conference scripts.
Sure.
With framing questions. And the end there where you're talking about this homeschool partnership, I think that's an absolutely outstanding way of looking at it. And, if there's a way that the parents can talk to their kids and we can encourage those conversations about what a good goal is, et cetera, that's really important. And Maura, your thoughts on the goal setting and your advice for teachers?
Yeah, so I love Lindsay's idea of really thinking about goals being in the drafting process and involving parents in that, as opposed to students just sort of in isolation, maybe trying to craft those goals and then present them to their parents. I think that's a really nice way to include parents and partner with them in the process. I think students really, as you were saying, students really struggle writing SMART goals that are also meaningful and something that they want to stick with. And so I love that idea. One of the things that I've been doing some research about and learning more about is this method that's used in the health field and also in special education called goal attainment scale scoring. And it's this process when a student sets a goal that they kind of identify some benchmarks between where they are right now currently and then what it will look like when they eventually reach their goal. And so they break it up into sort of 4 different steps. And each step is a different level. And it really would identify what it looks like. Okay, right now this is where I am. What would it look like between where I am right now and when I do reach my goal? And sort of describing that. And so it sort of breaks apart the steps of what the goal process looks like. And when students do that, and they would make sort of a scale, if you will, breaking apart these benchmarks. And I could see them doing this visually, like maybe drawing a picture of what it looks like in the different steps of the phases of reaching this goal. But it aids them in the reflective process, because then they're starting to think about, okay, I did this, whatever the habit or behavior or skill is that they're trying to develop with their goal. They're able to identify, okay, if this is what I did this week, this is sort of where I am on the process scale. And the idea of it being a scale is that it's, when we're achieving a goal, it's not a straight trajectory. So you kind of move forward a little bit, and then you have a week where you kind of slide back. And it just helps students to see this sort of process and this, the fluid nature of reaching goals. And so I've been really thinking about sort of ways that we could use this with students. So those are sort of some thoughts that I've been having.
I have a question for you, Maura. I like the idea of the levels and steps. It makes it really tangible with the action steps. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am just curious if that makes it feel more like a performance goal, like you know you've reached it. But we always, like, I teach them to make process goals. Always working on reading. You could be working on reading for the next decade of your life.
Right.
That fit in.
Yeah, so, I think one of the challenges, especially since students are around learning scales so much right now, there is this sort of connection that could be made. Oh, this is just like a learning scale, but it's really about like visualizing what the steps look like and thinking through and sort of front loading some of that reflection, like what what are some of the things that I have to do between now and reaching my goal? So it's almost like mini milestone goals that describe what it would look like before reaching the larger goal.
So, and Maura, I just want to point out that, you know, Kevin, when he was having a conversation about goals, and I had written down a couple different things. One was this idea of parent involvement. The other one was reflection and feedback, always getting feedback not only on your process, but on how kids are doing about the goals. But another question I had, which I think you just did a nice job of addressing, is are we talking to kids enough about how they know when a goal is done, right? Like, if I have all this evidence, as Allison said, you could be reading, you know, book A and you're done, but maybe you want to go now to the next level. And so how are we talking to kids about when they can, you know, do they set another goal related to that one, or how do we know when they're actually done? And, you know, is this a way that we can have kids talking to us and saying, you know, I think I'm done with this goal. I either achieved it through a performance, or I finished 5 books when I started out, I wanted 3. And what are we doing to help coach that idea of, you know what, I did this goal and I'm satisfied and now I want to move on. Do people have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we do on Swift is, it always astonishes me that we'll have 5th graders that actually advocate for themselves and say, I have all this evidence, and like you said, we're having those weekly conversations, just making sure, do you understand this goal? Does it make sense? How is your progress? But it's pretty powerful when kids are saying, I have all these pieces of evidence showing I have growth toward this goal. And I'm always asking, like, you feel like you met it? Do you want to tweak the language a little bit in it? Do you want to change it completely? And again, for us, using the transferable skills as more of a foundation helps. And that, like, if they have a communication goal, maybe they, met their writing goal that they established. I said, do you want to work on a different, type of writing or something else around writing? Or do you want to now switch gears towards speaking or listening? And it opens up those conversations and lets them start thinking about who they are as a person, as a learner. Yeah, it's definitely been useful. For us, we ask that students have at least 4 pieces of evidence per goal that they come up with, just because we feel like that generates a good variety of evidences. So by the time the end of the trimester comes around, they're able to show with a good amount of evidence that yes, they still need to keep the goal or they can change it. And that helps the conversation get started with us.
Right. So I also agree that the transferable skills are really such a great guide to connecting what we're doing within the classroom to their goals and finding evidence, and it makes it just such a natural connection. I'm also starting to realize, having just, and I said this before, working with just 7th graders this year and not 7, 8 multi-age. And I know, Kevin, you're on a multi-age team, so you have older learners as well, but that sometimes and I think I said this last year, but we put a lot of emphasis on these goals. And it's more, for me, being right in the midst of these conferences, it's more about the conversations that we're having and what I'm learning about the kids and what they care about and what they desire and what they need. And I mean, we've already, kids are advocating for math support, and and so I'm like, okay, this is great. You're advocating for math intervention, and you have an interest in fashion design. So your personal interest project, we now have a pathway for you. And so I think that sometimes we get so caught up in I like the idea of just 4 pieces of evidence, so that you can have some documentation, but also then realizing that goals can be fluid. Because I think sometimes we get, what happens when you reach your goal or do not reach your goal? People get kind of stuck, and that there is a fluidity to them, that they're going to morph and change as these kids are developing and changing, and it happens so rapidly in the middle years. So I do think that, and I know that we all agree that middle school goal setting has got to be really different from goal setting in high school, but it's right. Setting the foundations as a lifelong goal setter, and why, and the value for goals, because we don't want kids to, again, it's like middle school is all about having that love for learning and hooking kids into learning. But if we overdo this goal setting piece, just like that, if we overdo whatever it is, they're going to lose that love. I think we need to really have them feel valued in these conversations, and that's why I think that these conferences are so powerful and so valuable, that we're hearing them, talking with their family, we're all validating what they feel is important as an individual, and then we're here to support you, you know, and how can we do that, and how can we find the right pathway for you. So I'm not sure if all that went on a couple of tangents, but maybe you got what I said.
One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of is also something we haven't talked about, which is language. And what language are we using with kids and with each other and teachers? And so I'm wondering, like Lindsay, when you're talking to kids in these conferences, and Kevin and Allison, how are you explaining or having kids understand the language around goal setting? And is this something you emphasize, or do you expect that they know what growth mindset looks like, or what a process goal looks like? And how are folks addressing the language?
I mean, with us, that summer mailing helps a lot before our 5th graders come in, because we catch them early. So for their Hopes and Dreams conference, that's where we have that first go before the school year even starts, where we meet with the student and their guardian and have that conversation around, this is what our PLP process is, this is how we set goals, this is why. And like Lindsay was saying, it's really just starting them to recognize that we value that conversation more than anything. Because it really is just communicating about their strengths and challenges, and helping them be a part of their goal setting process. And for me, I've noticed that after we do that at the start of 5th grade, that just kind of generates and that continues. So when we have goal setting conferences as a 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader in the beginning of the school year, it's not like we have to go over that again. They just kind of get it because that's part of our process, and they're just able to come in and say, hey, at the end of last year, I feel like I really made good progress on this goal. I was talking to my parents about it over the summer, thinking I want to change it up to this. And again, I love how Lindsay put that, and just the valuing that conversation about these goals is more of a process is, I think, the key piece of that. So like for us, nothing's really scripted. It's just more that communication about strengths and challenges and where they see themselves growing throughout their middle school years.
Do you guys have your students practice the student-led conference with each other before it actually happens? Like, do you have them talk to each other and just go through the expectations, or like give sentence starters or any sort of that, anything like that?
Sometimes I'll have them do a screencast. I don't always have them practice with each other because a lot of their goals are very personal, and I don't want to put them on the spot and make them feel like they have to share with their friends. If they're willing to, they can. But yeah, they'll do a screencast just so they can practice kind of going through their PLP. But when it gets time for their conference, especially the 5th graders, we'll give them like starters, like, all right, what's your communication goal? They'll read it. And what kind of evidence did you provide? And they'll have it either up on the projector or on their computer showing their parents, and we'll prompt them with that. But by the time they're in 7th and 8th grade, they're just taking over. I sit down with them and I say, all right, let's open up, and they kind of take off running. That's how we handle it.
I was going to say that we don't practice for the October ones because they are they really start at home. Mm-hmm. And so we provide a clear outline of what conversations and sentence starters, I guess, they should have at home around their learning thus far. I mean, it's so early in the year and they're new to our team. And then start developing ideas for how they want to grow as a learner and individual, and what their passions and interests are. And that's how we get at the goals. So there's no real need, or I don't think there's a value for us at this point to practice, because then it's really about conversation, really being clear and transparent about your learning and your needs as an individual. And again, like Kevin said, a lot of the goals are personal, and they don't necessarily want to be sharing them with peers. And we respect that. And so when they come to the table, they know that it's not a formal presentation. We don't have anything up. We're sitting at just a regular table and we're talking. We're having a conversation, and they might be kind of like, the keynote of that conversation or the lead on it. The focus is on them, but it's all of us talking and sharing ideas and brainstorming to support them. And I find that they're such positive conversations. in the springtime, when they have a lot of evidence to share, that's when they might practice with a peer. But that's more around their personal interest projects and the work that they've done around their goals.
Okay. Allison and Maura, what are your thoughts on sort of structure or supports for students during the conference?
So based on how everything went last year, we are going to try and do a different model for 9th grade conferences, a student-led portion. And then there was some feedback last year from parents that they did want those individual connections as well with the core teachers, just to check in on like science specifically, progress towards proficiency in algebra and global studies. So they will be practicing with a peer because they will be with their school partnership. I like that term, Lindsay, because they'll be with their homeschool family unit and then will come meet with us individually. So they will be practicing that so that they can lead this conversation with their parents before touching base with the teachers.
Maura, what are your thoughts on that?
We always would at least give students opportunities to preview what the student-led conference process would look like. So we'd give them sort of the things that we'd expect them to go over and those different pieces. But in terms of a practice, we wouldn't do an official practice. We did the first time that we ever did it because it was a student's first experience of a student-led conference. But now it's sort of part of the culture at PA middle level. We would have, we actually have at our schools, kindergartners start with student-led conferences. So they start in kindergarten and they walk through stations with their parents and lead them through and talk about what they're doing. They have a math station and a literacy station, which is kind of a nice way. So it really is part of the culture of the students coming up. But we would always offer 8th graders to sit with 5th graders if the 5th graders want to practice before. But it's really, when the students do their student-led conference, it would be more about presenting for feedback about the goal instead of sort of, this is the goal that I have. So it wasn't on the PLP yet. It would be a conversation about the goal the student was hoping to set. Yeah, so that's sort of where we're at. But I do agree with what Kevin was saying, that a lot of the goals, the meaningful goals that students are setting, they are personal in nature. And so I think we have to be, if we want students to be setting these meaningful goals that they're going to stick with, we need to create spaces where students can set these personal goals and not feel like, okay, if I set this goal, I know I'm going to have to talk to a friend, or I have my reflective partner that I'm going to be sharing my pieces with. So there is that balance there of creating some safe spaces for kids, especially because whenever we're developing a new skill or accomplishing a goal, you have an emotional connection to it because you're invested in it and because you're not always going to get it. You know, you move forward and then you move back and you have a rough week and then you get better again. And so, you know, there's some hills and some valleys in the process of attaining goals. So.
All right. Thank you. I mean, every time we talk, there's so many connections, but one of the connections I just want to make is that Kathleen McClaskey came and talked to us. She's the author of a book called Making Learning Personal. And she really is talking. There's also the website, the CAST website, which is all about UDL. And a lot of what we're talking about here has clear links to UDL, which is, I'm sure most of you folks have heard about it and are getting trained in that. And when we're talking about goals and evidence, there's so many opportunities for kids to be engaged and kids to be expressing their understanding in different ways and putting that on the PLP. And so as you start to see more of, and just raise your hand if you're seeing UDL in your professional development. Okay, so I mean, I've just really seen it quite a bit, and in her book, she identifies UDL, I think it's in the 1st or 2nd chapter, as a really important coordinating concept for the PLPs and personalization. And there's really an emphasis on learner profiles and getting to know your students and these learner backpacks and these identities of your kids. And most of us are, realize the importance of this identity piece and realize the importance of these relationships. But I just want to point that out. If you're not hearing it now, you will be. It's like right there and out there, and a lot of people are talking about it. Also, just lastly, I want to say that, Kevin, that point about screencasting rather than practicing to protect kids' privacy or their sensitivity about some of their goals, I think is really outstanding. And that would be a great workaround, is to have kids screencast, and they could actually, listen to themselves and reflect on how they did. So I think that's really, a powerful example of how, talking to other teachers, you can come up with these great ideas. I did have a question too. How are folks dealing with the fact, Lindsay alluded to this, that we don't have a lot of evidence right now from kids? We're still in the initial phases. We've done some baseline assessments. When do you start talking to kids about like evidence and summarizing your evidence and curating your PLP? Where does that fit in your schema for the year? And maybe we could start with Allison and just hear how folks are thinking about that. And I know that, Kevin really preaches this a lot, but how are you also beginning to tie evidence to goals, and what does that look like in your classrooms? Allison?
Yes, the framework that I'm imagining in my mind doesn't work in terms of the high school proficiency-based system that we're in right now, because they have been collecting evidence from day one. So any proficient artifacts that they've made, whether it's a voice memo that answered a solar eclipse question or a model about how granite formed from our field trip, like all of that is going in as someone said it really well, online digital portfolio. So it is this portfolio that is being curated over time, starting day one, because everything in high school goes on that, like building proficient.
Okay. Kevin?
I guess we've started collecting evidence about 3 weeks ago or so. We do our goal setting conferences within the first few weeks of school, just because our kids have had their goals from the past. And then we've been utilizing Google Classroom, just putting it out, just remind kids every week to do their goal reflections. We have that half-hour block every Wednesday. This week I'm utilizing Google Forms for that, so each kid made their own form, they're reflecting on it, and they do that every week. And then every week I ask them to look for 1 to 2 pieces of evidence. If they have one, usually they come up with something with having 5 different goals. And when they put their goals in, again, I just ask them, put a document, image, photograph, whatever it may be, video, and just jot down real quickly, how does this connect to your goal? And that kind of keeps that process going of, okay, this image is connected to this goal because, and it's not formal. And I tell them, like, keep it really short, keep it like a little blurb. I'm not asking you to write a huge reflection, just jot down, how does what you just put on your PLP site connect to that goal? And that kind of ongoing process really helps. So by the time, the middle of October, end of October, November rolls around, you could ask most of our students and say, what are your goals? And they'll be able to tell you what their goals are, without looking at anything, and give some examples of evidences, which is pretty powerful.
Okay, Lindsay?
Yeah, so because our goal setting conferences are right now, we work on September and October is crafting their About Me, working on the personal narrative, and then also doing learning style inventories, as we talked about last time. And so shaping that identity piece. Now that they have drafted goals at these conferences with their families, as we enter into November and on, we'll have them, by the end of this month, they'll have them polished and put onto their PLP. We are using Protean. And then throughout the rest of the year, they'll be collecting evidence of their goals. And not just their goals, but also collecting evidence connected to our transferable skills.
Okay. And Mauro, how are you seeing your teachers approach the evidence?
Yeah, I think right now they're still in the goal setting phase. Our student-led conferences haven't happened yet. And so In terms of evidence collection, I think there's content area evidence collection that's happening that's more aligned with the proficiencies right now. And as the quarter's closing, I think that's sort of the focus. But once the goals are really set, that's when the evidence will start to be curated around the goal setting and the goals.
Okay. And, you know, in our classroom, one of the things that we're doing is we're starting to introduce this idea of collecting evidence, that not all evidence needs to be connected to your goals, your specific goals. And, you know, as Kevin mentioned, keep it simple. I've probably overreacted a little bit and wanting kids to, not a paragraph, but at least have maybe some academic language in the description of the summary. And we have a format for the summary. And again, you know, maybe that's a little too rigid, because at the end of the day, you want kids, you know, to be enjoying and engaged in the process rather than considering it to be a drag. So we started out this webinar wanting to talk about goals, and we ended up talking about a ton more, including the student-family partnership, which I really think is important. I also like the way we also talked about process. Lindsay's process is a little bit different, where she starts with the passions and interests, and then it's like this idea of drafting goals and incorporating the family, which I think is really important. And then, Lindsay, you also mentioned this idea of like how your fall conference is different than the spring conference, because there's two different, and I never even thought about that, two different purposes. One is to get to know the kid. The other one is to get to see what they're doing. So, and we also talked about, you know, the process that we're doing, and we touched a little bit on how teachers are being supported in this work. And so just as a quick reminder before we talk about consultations, I'm just wondering, Lindsay, if you could find, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but if there were a way that you could record one of your conferences, you know, get permissions. And I just, you know, it'd be really interesting for me to see how other conversations were going.
What do you think, Lindsay? You can get that recorded?
I can certainly try to record a conference. I don't know. They are so personal, and you know, it's so like you know, it's kind of like meeting somebody at the coffee shop and having a cup of coffee. You know, you get really deep really quick, and I'm not sure if I ask people to record a conversation if we would get to that level. Really understanding who their child is and who they are and what they care about. And I would love to say yes, but I also wouldn't want to take away from the conference, you know. And what do you want?
I tried that last year. I set up an iPad because I was trying to get some documentation of how our student-led conferences go, and that happened. The parents, it was one of the parents I've had for 3 years now, and the parent was fine, the student was fine, but you could tell like the second they knew it, and it wasn't anything, it was just like the iPad set up in the back of the room, but right. Like, you know, everybody was up a little straighter, and you know, acting, it just wasn't as comfortable as it could have been. And I feel like it did, like you were saying, it didn't capture like the essence of what these conferences are, because it felt like it had to be a certain way because it was being documented. But at the same time, I think there was still value in just kind of seeing how the conversation went, and I was looking at like splicing it up to make sure I'm only grabbing like little clips here and there that obviously wouldn't have any of that intimate information.
It's almost like you do the actual conversation, because the nice thing about these student-led conferences is it goes to this place where all of a sudden the mom is talking about when the student was in 3rd grade and how they loved frogs, and now they're really passionate about science, and you're like, oh my gosh, I know, like, you know what I mean? And so you want that essence, because as a teacher, you have such little contact in a space where that's the purpose, you know, like it's limited, and it's so important to see that and to see parents so proud of their kids and having these conversations and really welcoming you into the process. So it's almost like you have that conference, and then you say, hey, would you mind, like, even at home doing, you know, walking through, doing another version of the conference again, to record it, where it's really just about the student presenting the ideas, maybe. Because it's this sort of really special spot that you have as a teacher with, that you get to share with families and learners.
yeah, I mean, it's often like one of us will get up and walk to our bookshelf and be like, I have this great book for you, like, I'm like, okay, you're struggling to find something, like, here it is, or you want to know about this? Oh my gosh, did you know that I know this? It's like, it's so real, and it's like you're having people over at your house and you would share a book with them, or you would, or just talking to, really having a real conversation. And I don't know if that could be captured. I'm happy to try. Maybe I can ask for that, like Maura said, like kind of like to replicate afterwards, but I wouldn't want to take away from any of these conferences because they are so real and so personal, and just they all go in a different path.
Mm-hmm. These are actors. This is not a real conference.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I totally hear that, and I just wonder maybe if there's a way that we could just write a blog post about it, or just what you said is so important. Like this idea of having just a conversation with friends and family rather than formalizing it. But I mean, I feel like that your conversation looks a lot different than mine, which can be good. But I'd also like to see what other folks are saying or the tips that they have to make those conferences be such a positive experience. I do want to apologize. My internet's been flaking out on me a little bit. But the last thing I wanted to ask is for people to, as viewers may or may not know, PLP Pathways is doing a pilot professional development where we're helping Middle Grades Institute participants bridge to the Middle Grades Conference in January, and we're supporting their action research projects. And we've been conducting some consultations, and I was just wondering if we could hear from folks how those consultations are going. And Maura, could we start with you?
Yep, so my first consultation actually is happening right after this at 4:45. Right. We were trying to schedule with my participant and their teaching partner because they're both working on some curriculum. And so trying to schedule that was a little tricky, but we're going to be touching base in about 20 minutes.
Cool. Awesome. Lindsay?
So my first consultation was very great and helpful. We didn't end up really using the protocol because we just like went deep fast, and I feel very confident that this particular person is like doing exceptional work, and I was excited to hear about it but know a lot about it. So we just like went to another place, and we didn't feel the need because of circumstances to circle back to the protocol. But I am going to have my second consult tomorrow, and we're meeting outside of school and in person, which will be nice. And so I will use the format, and this is someone that's also very familiar with protocols. Unfortunately, my third person I'm not able to connect with. I don't know what's going on, so I need to talk to whoever can help me with that.
Okay.
I'm going to talk to her colleague tomorrow to figure out how I can reach out in a different way.
Okay. Yeah, and just let me know if you need help with that. I could try as well. Kevin?
Yeah, they've been fantastic. I've gotten a chance to have a Google Hangout with all three of them, and one thing I've loved is I'm just getting so many awesome ideas. I feel like it's like a webinar, you know, where we're talking about it and just hearing their ideas, how they're thinking about their PLP process, how they're incorporating it with their own school setting. And even if it's not something that I feel like I would work with my own system, I'm thinking about how can I bring some of these ideas to our PLP committee to help school-wide with teams that are in a different spot than we are. It's so neat to hear these awesome ideas and just have these conversations about, you know, where they're stuck, where they're excited about this work. They've been going great. I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversations.
Awesome. Allison?
Yeah, same here. I feel extremely grateful that we're doing this. It's like having another webinar. The idea about the identity tree came from one of the people that I consulted with, and it's just so like and it was hard to schedule. Like the daily grind just gets on all of us, but you know, it's a reminder that we're all so in this together. Like the same struggles with proficiencies are happening across the state, right? I'm not just like in this little bubble crying on my own. Like we're all working with these scales and helping the kids understand the language and then the, you know, PLP and how's it working for you. It's just, these conversations are so critical to have right now in the, like where we are in Vermont with education.
That's awesome. I'm actually sort of fortunate that the 3 people I'm consulting with are in my building, which is interesting because it presents a couple of different, you know, challenges. But it's just been really, it's been a change in my role, is to actually, you know, hear what people are doing and not only listening and being a student of what they're doing, but also trying to really think about the process and what they want to accomplish and how to, you know, how to consult with them to get them to where they need to be and where they want to be. And I think those conversations, as you all have mentioned, are just really, really valuable. And I just want to encourage people to continue supporting those folks. And, you know, this is part of our role. And if we can be supporting the good work that they're doing, for me, it's just been really, really interesting to have these conversations, you know, 1-to-1, 20 minutes, and just, you know, they're much different than other conversations I have. Maybe it's the expectations, but it's not just a, you know, your typical teacher to teacher convo. It's really interesting. And so the folks here are working really hard. As Allison mentioned, I think a lot of people are just buried right now in work, and it's another thing to do. But I think they're very valuable. And so if we can just, you know, really support and work on that, I think that'll be great. We only have a few minutes left here. We're a little bit over time. I just want to thank you guys for the great work that you're doing. I continue to be inspired by you. And I got really good feedback ever since, you know, watching the webinar as part of the PD. And I got some really good feedback about the webinar. Somebody was like, wow, there was a lot of good ideas. I started taking notes. And so that was cool. And a lot of that is because of the conversations that you guys are having. I believe our next webinar is, I think, November 16th. All right, guys, thanks very much. We'll see you in November, and I hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much, and I'll be in touch.
Thanks, Don.
Bye, guys.
Bye.